Thousands of years ago, ancient civilizations built structures that still leave researchers searching for answers. Massive stones were moved, precisely shaped, and assembled with techniques we are still trying to fully understand. But the real mystery isn't simply how these structures were built. It's why their builders chose to create them in the first place. In this documentary, we'll examine the evidence behind some of the most puzzling ancient structures ever discovered, and separate genuine mysteries from the myths surrounding them. Somewhere on this planet right now, a block of stone weighing more than 100 elephants is sitting exactly where someone placed it thousands of years ago, cut so precisely that a blade still cannot slide between it and its neighbor. No cranes, no steel, no written manual explaining how it was done. And yet it is there, staring back at us, daring modern engineers to explain it. Over the next few minutes, we're going to walk through some of the most baffling structures ever built by human hands, places where the tools of the past and the achievements they produced simply do not add up. Stick around, because by the end of this, you may never look at primitive civilizations the same way again. Let's start with something that shouldn't even be possible according to basic physics. In the highlands of modern Lebanon, at a site once known as the City of the Sun, sit 3 stone blocks so large that each one outweighs a fully loaded Boeing 747. They were quarried, carved, and somehow transported before being lifted into a wall that still stands today. Even with the largest modern cranes, moving a single one of these blocks would push the limits of what our machinery can lift, let alone maneuvering it through open terrain without a single crack. Historians generally credit later builders with expanding the site, but the foundation blocks are so far outside the ordinary scale of ancient construction that many researchers admit we still don't have a fully satisfying explanation for the logistics involved. Then there is the matter of a certain pyramid in Egypt that has been picked apart by scientists, tomb raiders, and conspiracy theorists alike for nearly 5,000 years, and it still keeps secrets. It was built from roughly 2 million blocks of stone, some of them ferried hundreds of miles down the Nile, fitted together with a precision that rivals modern construction tolerances. Its sides align with true north so accurately that surveyors today are impressed, and the ratio of its measurements approximates a famous mathematical constant that most people assume wasn't formally understood until centuries later. Inside, a chamber built from imported red stone contains an empty stone box that is physically too wide to have passed through the doorway, meaning it had to be placed there while the structure was still being built around it. Explorers who broke into the sealed interior over 1,000 years ago found it already empty, and to this day nobody has definitively explained where its original contents went. Halfway across the world, on a wind-scoured rock rising out of jungle in the middle of an island nation, a king built a fortress in the sky roughly 1,500 years ago. What makes this place remarkable isn't just the palace at the summit, but the fact that its builders somehow figured out how to pump and distribute water to the very top of a sheer rock face, feeding pools and gardens that functioned like a modern hydraulic system. There were no motors, no visible pumps, nothing but channels, gravity, and an understanding of pressure that historians still study today when trying to reconstruct exactly how it worked. Not far from there, on a much older continent, farmers in the Andes carved concentric rings into the earth that look almost like an amphitheater built for giants. Each ring sits at a slightly different elevation, creating its own distinct temperature and humidity, so that a single hillside effectively became a controlled laboratory for testing crops from completely different climates. Modern agronomists have measured a genuine temperature gradient between the top and bottom rings, and some believe this site was used to adapt plants to new environments centuries before Europeans arrived. Nobody has found a written manual describing exactly how the builders calculated these microclimates, only the terraces themselves, still doing their job after hundreds of years. Sticking with stonework that refuses to make sense, there's a temple complex in the Bolivian highlands where broken slabs of andesite and diorite, some of the hardest stone on the planet, were cut with interior angles so exact that pieces fit together like machine tool parts. Some blocks show drill holes of a consistent diameter, spaced with a regularity that looks almost industrial. Nobody disputes that the people who lived there were skilled, but the tools that would have been available to them, mostly stone hammers and sand abrasives, make the precision of these cuts genuinely hard to explain using only conventional methods, and researchers are still testing theories about how it was achieved. Now travel to a completely different kind of mystery, one that sits underwater. Off the coast of a small Japanese island, divers discovered a massive stepped formation with sharp right angles, straight edges, and what looked like terraces cut into rock roughly 10,000 years ago, back when sea levels were much lower and the area would have been dry land. One marine geologist, who has spent decades diving the site, argues it shows clear signs of deliberate carving. Other geologists strongly disagree, pointing out that the local sandstone naturally fractures into similar rectangular shapes. This is one of the rare cases on our list where the scientific community is genuinely split, and it remains an open debate rather than a settled mystery, which honestly makes it even more. Underground, there's an entire city carved beneath the surface of central Turkey capable of sheltering thousands of people along with their livestock and food stores. It descends many levels into the earth and includes ventilation shafts engineered so precisely that fresh air still reaches the lowest chambers today, along with stone doors that could be rolled shut from the inside to seal off entire sections during an attack. What continues to puzzle researchers is the sheer scale of planning required: ventilation, drainage, structural support, and defensive design, all coordinated across a structure that was expanded gradually over many generations without, as far as we know, any centralized blueprint. Across the ocean in Peru, a fortress made of interlocking stones, some weighing over 100 tons, forms zigzagging walls that have survived some of the most powerful earthquakes in South American history. Each block was individually shaped to lock into its neighbors at irregular angles, a technique that modern seismic engineers now recognize as remarkably effective at absorbing and dissipating shockwaves. The stones fit so tightly that mortar was never needed, and the walls have outlasted colonial-era structures built right next to them using more modern methods, some of which have already crumbled. Back in Europe, a stone circle on an English plain has been rearranged, studied, and debated for centuries, and we still don't have full agreement on why it was built. Some of its largest stones weigh as much as a loaded delivery truck and were dragged from a source many miles away, a transport effort that would have required serious coordination among a large number of people. The site aligns with the sunrise on the summer solstice and the sunset on the winter solstice, with a precision that suggests deliberate astronomical planning. Yet the specific ceremonies once performed there were never written down, leaving modern researchers to interpret physical evidence rather than any surviving text. Then there's a limestone temple in southern India that was not built up from the ground, but carved downward out of an entire mountainside, removing an estimated several 100,000 tons of solid rock to leave behind a freestanding, multi-story structure complete with courtyards, halls, and sculpted elephants at its base. A single mistake with a chisel could have ruined the entire multi-year project, since there was no way to add material back once it was removed. Engineers who study the site today are less puzzled by the tools used, which were fairly typical for the era, and more astonished by the mathematical planning required to excavate such a complex structure entirely in reverse. There's also a colossal iron pillar standing in New Delhi that has been exposed to monsoon rains and humid air for over 16 centuries and has barely rusted. Metallurgists eventually figured out that the ancient smiths who forged it used a particular ratio of phosphorus in the iron that created a thin, naturally protective layer on the surface, essentially inventing a rudimentary form of rust resistance more than 1,000 years before modern stainless steel existed. It's a case where science eventually caught up with the mystery, but the fact that iron workers achieved this without any understanding of modern chemistry is still remarkable. Some structures raise questions less about how they were built and more about why they were abandoned. In southern China, an enormous stele was carved directly out of a mountainside during the 15th century, intended to be the largest monument of its kind in the world. Workers had already shaped its base, body, and capstone when someone finally calculated the numbers and realized that no known method could move a finished piece weighing an estimated several thousand tons from the quarry to its intended resting place. The project was abandoned right there in the rock, and the unfinished steel still lies exactly where ambition outran engineering. A genuinely humbling reminder that not every ancient project actually succeeded. Underwater engineering shows up again on a set of small islands in the Pacific, where an entire ceremonial city was constructed by stacking massive columns of naturally occurring basalt into artificial platforms rising directly out of a coral reef. Some of these columns weighed dozens of tons, and moving them across open water without pulleys, metal tools, or draft animals would have required a level of organized labor and maritime skill that researchers are still working to fully reconstruct through oral histories and archaeological surveys. Consider also a stepwell in western India, an inverted structure that plunges nearly 100 feet underground through a repeating pattern of geometric staircases, built centuries ago to guarantee access to water no matter how far the level dropped during the dry season. Photographed from above, the symmetry looks almost computer-generated, yet it was calculated and built entirely by hand, purely to solve a practical problem in a region where drought could mean the difference between survival and starvation. There's a Roman aqueduct in Spain that has carried water for the better part of 2,000 years using nothing but a barely perceptible downward slope and the pull of gravity, with stone blocks fitted together so precisely that no mortar was ever needed to hold the arches in place. It has survived earthquakes, centuries of weather, and continuous use, and engineers today still study its proportions when trying to understand how Roman builders achieved such long-term structural stability without modern reinforcement. And finally, there's a dome in Rome built almost 2,000 years ago from a specific mix of volcanic ash and lime that modern materials scientists are still trying to fully replicate, because the concrete actually seems to strengthen over time when exposed to seawater and weather rather than deteriorating the way our modern concrete does. The dome remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built, lit only by a single circular opening at its peak that has let in sunlight and rain in equal measure for 2 millennia. There's also a lesser-known wonder buried in the sands of northwestern Saudi Arabia, where archaeologists using satellite imagery recently identified hundreds of enormous rectangular stone enclosures scattered across the desert, some stretching longer than a football field. Radiocarbon dating on animal bones found inside pushed their age back further than researchers initially expected, meaning these structures predate both the pyramids and Stonehenge by a wide margin. Their exact ritual purpose is still debated, but their sheer number and consistent design across such a vast area suggests a level of shared cultural coordination that nobody expected from communities living in the region at that time. In the Aegean, beneath a hillside near an ancient palace once linked to the myth of a monstrous labyrinth, archaeologists uncovered a plumbing system with flushing toilets, covered sewage channels, and clay pipes engineered to control water pressure, technology that many assumed didn't reappear in Europe until the Roman era, if not later. The site's layout is so maze-like that some historians believe it may have directly inspired the legend, built from a genuine architectural experience of getting lost in a real building rather than a purely imaginary tale. Meanwhile, on a remote Scottish archipelago, a nearly perfect ring of standing stones has quietly kept pace with Stonehenge in both age and mathematical sophistication, though it receives a fraction of the attention. Surveys of the surrounding ditch suggest that digging it by hand would have taken the equivalent of one person working nonstop for roughly 9 years, an enormous investment of labor for a community that, as far as we can tell, had no writing system to record why the effort mattered so much to them. There's a similarly humbling sight in central Germany, a set of concentric ditches and wooden gates arranged with gates aligned to the sunrise and sunset at specific points in the year, built nearly 7,000 years ago, almost 2,000 years before Stonehenge existed. Archaeoastronomers have confirmed the alignments are too precise to be accidental, which means Neolithic farmers in Central Europe were tracking the solar calendar with real accuracy long before most textbooks give them credit for. Even structures we think we understand keep surprising us. A vault in what is now Iraq, built by Sasanian engineers roughly 1,700 years ago, remains the largest unreinforced brick structure of its kind still standing, spanning open space without a single supporting column and without ever using scaffolding during construction, according to the building techniques recorded from the era. Structural engineers who study it today admit that by conventional calculations, a brick vault this thin, at this span, shouldn't have remained standing for more than a fraction of that time. And yet it has. There's also a set of megalithic dolmens scattered across the Caucasus Mountains, some 3,000 of them, built from massive sandstone slabs cut and joined with such precision that archaeologists routinely describe the seams as essentially airtight, even after 4,000 years of exposure to the elements. Nobody has fully reconstructed the specific tools used to achieve that level of fit, since only fairly basic stone and bone implements have ever been recovered from the surrounding sites. Off in Southeast Asia, a temple complex was constructed not as a single building, but as an entire functioning city built around water, complete with moats, reservoirs, and channels engineered to manage seasonal flooding across an area covering hundreds of square kilometers. Recent satellite and laser mapping surveys revealed that the surrounding urban area was far larger and more densely populated than anyone previously estimated, forcing historians to rewrite entire chapters about how a pre-industrial society organized what may have been the largest low-density city on Earth at the time. And on a quieter island in the Mediterranean, prehistoric temple builders raised stone structures older than either the pyramids or Stonehenge, using outer wall blocks weighing up to 50 tons, despite having no access to metal tools or even the wheel. For centuries, local communities genuinely believed only giants could have built them. And while we now understand more about the construction methods involved, the coordination required from a small island population remains a genuinely open question for archaeologists. What ties all of these places together isn't evidence of lost super technology or vanished ancient astronauts, whatever the internet might suggest. It's something arguably more impressive. The fact that human beings, working with observation, patience, trial and error, and often astonishing amounts of coordinated labor, solved engineering problems that still challenge us today. Knowledge doesn't always move forward in a straight line. Sometimes it's refined over generations. Sometimes it's lost when a civilization collapses or its records are destroyed. And sometimes we simply rediscover, centuries later, that people who came before us were far more capable than we tend to give them credit for. Every one of these sites is a reminder that mystery and human ingenuity are not opposites. Often, they're the exact same thing, standing in stone, still waiting for us to fully catch up. It's also worth remembering that new discoveries keep reshaping this list. Ground-penetrating radar, laser mapping from aircraft, and satellite imagery have revealed entire cities, canal networks, and monuments hidden under jungle canopy or desert sand that nobody knew existed even 20 years ago. Every time archaeologists uncover one of these sites, the same pattern repeats. A structure that shouldn't have been possible with the tools available at the time turns out to be exactly what the evidence shows was built. That doesn't mean every unanswered question has a mundane explanation waiting to be found. And honest researchers are usually the first to admit when something genuinely stumps them. But it does mean the honest answer to most of these mysteries isn't aliens or a lost global superpower. It's simply that ancient people were smarter, more organized, and more capable of long-term planning than we tend to assume from the comfort of the modern world, and that our own knowledge of the past is still very much a work in progress. If any of these structures amazed you, let us know in the comments which one you'd want to see explored in a full episode of its own, and subscribe if you want more real, evidence-based journeys into the ancient world's most puzzling achievements.